Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker of our inaugural Cislunar Security Conference, Major General John Shaw. And General Shaw, what a dynamic environment in which we are working and pursuing innovations in defense of our great nation. With these dynamic changes, even of the past few weeks and the past 24 hours, let me introduce General Shaw as the Commander, Combined Force Space Component Command of U.S. Space Command, as well as the Deputy Commander, Space Operations Command, United States Space Force. And just announced this morning, we can virtually congratulate General Shaw on his Senate confirmation yesterday. Congratulations, General Shaw, for promotion to Lieutenant General, receiving your 3rd star, and your assignment to become the next Deputy Commander of U.S. Space Command. Like I said, it's a dynamic environment. General Shaw, I was inspired earlier this year when you shared that one of General Raymond's first actions at U.S. Space Command was the stand-up of the Combined Force Space Component Command, showing the commitment of the United States and the priority importance that our nation places on working closely with our coalition partners. General Shaw leads more than 17,000 joint and combined personnel to deliver combat-relative space capabilities to combat commanders, coalition partners, the joint force, and the nation. In a speech this summer, General Shaw mentioned that, quote, "The Space Force expects a greater demand for situational awareness out and beyond to the moon as human space activities increase," end quote. And it's obvious that those remarks are directly applicable to our conference this week. For the audience, we plan to have some time for questions with General Shaw that I will moderate. So if you would please type your questions in the Q&A box, I'll pull from those for a short Q&A session. General Shaw, thank you for your service, for your leadership, and thank you for sharing some of your time with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me virtually in welcoming General Shaw. Over to you, sir.
Well, hey, thank you for that nice introduction, and good morning, everybody, from the beautiful Central Coast of California. It's sunny and in the high 60s here today. It's a truly beautiful day. I don't know where you are in the country and what you're dealing with, but if you're in Colorado, you're still recovering from a pretty wintry day yesterday. And hey, I'm really proud and I'm honored to be the keynote here on this inaugural Cislunar Security Conference. It's inaugural, right? The first. And I don't think these are going away anytime soon. Part of me wants to say, what took you? You know, we needed to maybe be talking about this sooner, but we're talking about it now, and I think that's terrific. Thanks to the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory for hosting this, and I think it's going to be a terrific event. I looked at the agenda. You have some terrific speakers. You're going to get to hear from General Thompson, our Vice Chief of the Space Force, tomorrow. You're going to hear from Gordon Kordiak, who's at the tip of the spear doing space domain awareness for us in the Space Force enterprise, and AFRL's got some time on the calendar that I hope they're gonna talk through all of the exciting projects that they're working on to push us further into the cislunar environment. So you're absolutely right, exciting time, and again, honored to be here today. So let me start by saying I have a major announcement to make. I just finished recently watching both seasons of Cobra Kai on Netflix. And it took me a little while to work through it because for me, 2 episodes at a time is a binge and such. But I think it's important, and it actually has relevance to my message today. And you're probably all wondering, what is it? Well, I grew up a child of the 80s, and maybe some of you did too, or at least you were aware of the Karate Kid movies in the 1980s. And it was all about Danny and Mr. Miyagi as the good guys against Cobra Kai and Johnny Lawrence as the bad guy. And that's kind of how I grew up, understanding that whole franchise. Well, here we are 30 years later, and in Cobra Kai, you see a little different perspective. You know, maybe it isn't all clear cut on what we thought was real back in the 80s with regard to Danny and Johnny Lawrence. Johnny Lawrence has a perspective too. Cobra Kai has a perspective. And the entire show, and I commend it to you, it's probably worth watching for those that are familiar with the franchise and want to catch up. The theme of it is how things are different and we need to think differently. And that's what we need to be doing about the space environment that we're looking into. We have to adjust our perspective, and we have to be looking out further. If I go to a little bit of a historical analogy we look back to the maritime domain. and how maritime power evolved. You know, it started with seagoing craft that were only powered by humans and oars. And in the age of the Roman trireme, those vessels did not venture beyond the sight of land. They stayed in the close littoral regions because if they went beyond land, they didn't have the navigation capabilities to perhaps make it back safely. That was a very near horizon that they operated in. But due to a number of drivers, some were security, some were economic, some were sheer exploration, perhaps in pursuit of economic possibilities. It drove technology and activity further. In the Mediterranean world, it eventually drove commerce to cross the entire Mediterranean and technologies in terms of sales and such to accompany. In the Pacific, in Polynesia, the drive to find new places for new places to live brought the Polynesian star navigators and their skills to bear, and again, made their horizons expand even further. So we're in the same situation, I'd propose, with regard to space. We have to push our horizons further. We have consistently, really ever since the beginning of the space age, we've looked to the geosynchronous environment as kind of that edge where the triremes would sail to inside of land, of where we did our activity, where we did our space situational awareness, where we set our technologies to focus on. That needs to change. In fact, even we need to change our terminology. And let me propose it here today. We still talk in some circles about deep space being the geosynchronous arena, and that needs to change. LEO is now the new intertidal zone, or even inside the reef. GEO is the new littorals. And Cislunar is our new AOR, at least from a U.S. Space Command perspective, and also from where we are venturing with regard to, in many ways, with exploration and commercial. And that's where we're going. And I'm not sure I want to call Cislunar deep space, because my astronomer friends will laugh at us when they think about deep space. They're looking near the edge of the observable universe in the quasar grid. And so maybe we just need to not think about that term anymore, but we need to realize that we have been focusing in a little too close, and we need to adjust our focus. So why Cislunar? Again, a host of reasons. Exploration. NASA is definitely had a sight set on the moon with the new Artemis plan. They'll be venturing there in the next few years. And they're going to have requirements for good space domain awareness in that arena, good communications architectures and such. Exploration alone is driving us to Cislunar. Commercial activity, I predict, will definitely expand to the Cislunar arena, perhaps as just a stepping stone to even further activity as we progress further into this century. And I was just catching in my news feed this morning, and probably some of you have much better details than I, of the announcement being made of a publication, two publications in an astronomy journal about water being found on the moon, and not necessarily at the poles. It may be far more pervasive than we thought. And in fact, it's possible that the moon is another watery body, just like Earth. It's just all ice right now. And if there's a lot of water on the moon, that's a game changer when it comes to exploration for commercial activity, harvesting the elements inside the water molecule for fuel and other activities as we go further. And Cislunar is an arena important to us now from a security perspective. I've already alluded to it. We need to understand what's going on in the Cislunar sphere to support exploration and commercial activity. We need to understand what's happening in the Cislunar sphere when other nations are operating in that environment. We also need to realize it's a different environment. It's not just extending beyond geosynchronous orbit. We're in a new topography as we get it in Cislunar. All right, we have the 5 Lagrange points of the Earth-Moon system that are part of that topography. And we're actually already seeing others using those Lagrange points and halo orbits around those Lagrange points as new high ground within the Cislunar sphere. The weak stability boundary between the Earth and the Moon, in terms of the gravity wells between those two, adds in some interesting orbital dynamics that we really don't count for in our classic propagation of orbital motion. Even a little bit of solar pressure in that environment can lead to chaotic effects. Just a little bit of input can lead to large outputs in how we see objects moving around in the cislunar environment. So it's going to require us to think about space domain awareness in a new way. There have been some developments already. We're already seeing it. Our government is already gearing up to take a look at cislunar, and it's not only the things that that I've alluded to before and what we're doing within the Department of Defense, it's broader than that. Earlier this year, NASA awarded 3 companies contracts to develop lunar landers and part of the Human Landing System program. These are the first such contracts since the Apollo lunar module, and one of the following, Dynetics SpaceX and Blue Origin, will be responsible for building and operating spacecraft that will land the next American man and first American woman on the moon. Again, the stated goal is for 2024, and that's part of the Artemis plan I mentioned earlier. And Artemis is NASA's proposed implementation of the return to the moon for sustained exploration utilization as we look to the lunar sphere and to Mars and beyond. Still being finalized, but it's a critical alignment of policy priorities aligning against the cislunar sphere. And then most of you are tracking, I think in July, that the White House National Space Council released a report entitled The New Era for Deep Space Exploration and Development. It describes their rationale and purpose for looking beyond the geo-orbits into cislunar and beyond for national security priorities. The report supports an ambitious vision for human space exploration and development, one that calls for a sustained human and robotic presence across the solar system. This will require an expanding sphere of commercial, international, and civil partnerships to get us there. And the National Space Council's vision begins with a campaign to utilize Earth's orbital environment, the surface and resources of the moon, and cislunar space to develop the critical technologies, operational capabilities, and commercial space economy necessary for a sustained human presence, first on the moon, and then Mars, and perhaps one day beyond. And it's not just the executive branch. This is getting attention across our government. In acknowledgement of DoD's efforts to assess these capabilities and requirements for a cislunar region of space, this summer, the House report accompanying the proposed fiscal year 21 NDAA directs the Secretary of Defense to submit a report on deep space mission requirements for national security. We'll see how that actually manifests itself in the final NDAA, which we would expect to have before the end of this calendar year. So, and then we're doing some work already, and I'm not going to steal the thunder of the presenters that you're going to hear from over the next 2 days. But I think a great example was that AFRL is doing with their Cislunar Highway Patrol System, CHIPS. You'll see a picture of Ponch and John in their charts, if you get to see those particular charts, as one example of how we need to replace SDA sensors in Cislunar. You know, we can't do the traditional path of trying to reach out to Cislunar with sensors solely in the terrestrial sphere. We're going to need them on orbit, in multiple orbits within the Cislunar sphere to really understand what's going on there. So the bottom line, I look forward to some Q&A and have some discussion on these lines, but the bottom line is humanity's focus is growing now, and its destiny lies in transition now and eventually beyond the Cislunar sphere. And multiple lines of effort in multiple lines of effort, exploration, commercial, economic, security are taking us there. It's not just one, it's happening on multiple fronts. And we need to be, our focus and our attention needs to be there to keep pace. So that's what I had to kind of kick off as a keynote. I hope that sets the stage. I'm very curious to see what's on everybody's minds and have a discussion.
General Shaw, thank you for those remarks. I have a series of questions that people have sent me, and I encourage others to add them to the Q&A window. And I'm first going to start, General Shaw, with some of the questions that I had sent to me before we kick this off. Would you share with us, do you think the security framework for sharing information with our allies and commercial partners is adequate? And if so, you know, what are some of the key highlights? And if not, what initiatives do you think need to be undertaken to expand that sharing framework?
So where we are today is not sufficient, but we're making great progress. And I'm happy to say that from where my current job here at Vandenberg as the Combined Force Space Component Commander, and by the way, many have heard me say I'm very fond of and proud of that first word of my duty title, combined, right? Because it means it's about allies and partnerships and coalition teammates as we move forward. We are at a stage today that is far beyond even a year ago in terms of sharing and communicating with our allies' space operations centers around the globe, and in particular, the UK SPOC, CANSPOC, Australia's OSPOC, and also Germany and France and their space operations centers. We are routinely talking to them. A good example was earlier this year during the Dragon mission to the International Space Station and its return. So the mission in May to the station and return in August. We were sharing observations of what was among the allies that I mentioned in that particular mission. That said, we still do have a long way to go. We do have some security constraints we need to work on so we can share data more easily. And it isn't just security constraints in terms of policy, it's also the mechanisms by which we share on networks, on multiple classification levels, and how we can do that really at the speed of machines. So we're making great progress. I do think that we're kind of the focal point for that here at Vandenberg and doing that with allies, but it'll be a continuing effort in the years ahead.
Thank you for that, General Shaw. Let me give you the next question. What do you believe DoD's Cislunar security role will evolve into with regard and with respect to security of commercial assets, and maybe part two about the assets of our allies?
Yeah, so it will start first and foremost with space domain awareness. You know, right now we tend to look just out to geo. It's the proverbial person looking for their car keys under the spotlight, because that's where they're used to looking and where they can see best. And we have to, as I said in my remarks, we have to change our perspective, our paradigm. We got to turn a little Cobra Kai on this and start looking beyond geo and realizing that objects behave a little bit differently beyond geo. That will undergird all of these activities. I would point out, we as the Department of Defense today are the ones that do collision assessment for NASA and the International Space Station in LEO. When NASA moves with Artemis into the lunar environment, I expect that the Department of Defense will be asked to help with space domain awareness in the lunar environment, and we have to be prepared for that. Same for commercial activity. I think we will encourage investment and encourage additional activity on the commercial and economic sectors if there is a clear picture of what is going on in the cislunar sphere that we can share. I do think that will ultimately transition to a Department of Commerce capability, and that's a separate topic on space traffic management that I know many in the audience are following, but that will be part of a broader security approach to the cislunar sphere that has to undergird all other activity.
Following up on that, we do have a question from the audience about transitioning the space tracking mission to commerce. How do you see, you mentioned a little bit about how do you see that support needed for cislunar, for tracking and a space domain awareness as that tracking mission transitions to the Department of Commerce?
We will, by the way, still a little bit more to see what happens in congressional language on transition and in resources for the Department of Commerce to take on space traffic management. And a reality check, their focus is going to actually have to be more in those traditional areas where we are seeing the huge preponderance of activity, right? LEO with proliferated low Earth orbit constellations, out to GEO, which is as congested as it's ever been. So a reality check, that's going to be their primary focus. But I think that we will continue to partner with them, not only in those arenas, but further out into Cislunar, and that will eventually be part of their focus as well.
Thank you for that answer. Next question, how does the U.S. Space Command's Space Command and Control approach fit within the thoughts about the joint all-domain command and control concepts that we hear about?
Yeah, so we're getting a little bit off topic from Cislunar, but it's relevant. So joint all-domain command control is if we achieve that vision, it is anything that's happening in any domain is discoverable and usable and available to others in other domains. Now, most of the vignettes we see for joint all-domain command control involve the terrestrial domains, maritime, air, and land, and involve the space domain so much as so that others operating, warfighters operating in the terrestrial domains understand what's happening in space, so they know that if there's a loss of space capability, they understand that and they can account for it, and it becomes part of their working in a degraded environment. But I'm also fond of pointing out that those of us that work with activities in the space arena also need joint all-domain command and control. And I point to the numerous threats that we are responding to that are evolving that can threaten our space capabilities. And so if there is a maritime vessel with a jammer on board that is affecting our ability to do SATCOM or some other kind of capability in space, we need to know about that maritime threat. If there is a mobile directed energy platform on land that's moving around that's a threat to our space capabilities, we want to know about that. And if there's an airborne ASAT capability, we need to know about that. And so General Dickinson, in his role as U.S. Space Command Commander, also needs all-domain command and control and awareness for those threats that could emerge out of any three of those terrestrial domains and affect the space domain. And they're all connected, and that, again, I would tie it to Cislunar to say that we can't just focus down on the inside the reef or inside the littorals as we've done before. It's going to have to extend out into the AOR that for us has expanded to Cislunar.
Thank you for that. So let's talk about, we have some talks coming up over the next 2.5 days that will address some of the details of this, but we'd like to hear, one of the questions here, I'd like to hear your perspectives on sort of the technologies and needs to sort of operate in Cislunar. Do you see a need for additional position navigation and timing capabilities similar to what we have with GPS? Or do you think the commercial sector will provide that? Maybe you could provide your thoughts about sort of the technologies and needs to navigate in the Cislunar environment.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up. I probably could have mentioned that in remarks that, it's another reason where we have kept our sights a little too low, literally in terms of the gravity well, right? On GPS and PNT on the terrestrial spheres. We do use GPS today on orbit. There are some payloads that are able to use the GPS signals, but again, those tend to be in the closer regions to Earth. I think you have a piece on your agenda that we'll talk about. Someone is going to talk to you about PNT in the Cislunar environment. I do see that as a need going forward. It has to be part of a broader picture of understanding what's going on in space, where we have our capabilities, where potential threats might be. So I do see that need evolving.
Thank you for that. So our next question, looking at the future of Space Operations Command and where Cislunar might live, the question is, do you see each Delta maybe expanding their portfolio, so to speak? Or if you played the tape forward 5 or 10 or longer years, would you see a new Delta potentially for Cislunar?
I think, so this question kind of, it asks questions about our capabilities as well as an AOR and such. And I think form will follow function. So whether we need a new Delta or not will follow the functions and the mission sets that we get. Our Delta 2 within the Space Force today is the Delta for Space Domain Awareness. And we have had a continual dialogue about expanding that mission set beyond GEO into the Cislunar environment. So I expect that Delta is going to be part of that. Our Delta 9 for orbital warfare focuses right now on where we have capabilities mostly within the geosynchronous belt. I expect that as we move capability beyond into Cislunar, that Delta, or if functions demand it, additional Deltas could conceivably be brought into being to support those activities. I do think that we need a little bit of reality check to realize the preponderance still of what we do inside Space Operations Command today is focused on delivering warfighting capability today. Right? We don't have an Artemis program around the moon today. We don't have commercial activities headed to the moon today, but we do have warfighters around the world depending on all sorts of space capabilities, and so that's our primary focus. But we can do both. We can sustain that focus, and we can still get ahead of where we see activity expanding and where it needs to be. And I think we're doing that. I think you'll hear from AFRL today. I think you hear from from Gordon Kordiak on how we're changing space domain awareness to look out that far. And I think we are on the right path.
We're going to really stretch a little bit here, General Shaw, with this next question a bit. You kind of addressed that we don't have the Artemis program yet going on, but maybe you could play the tape forward in your mind a bit. Does the Space Force consider taking on all of the space missions in Joint Pub 314 to the lunar level? So, or maybe what parts of commercial will be done there? Will protection of U.S. personnel and assets fall under one of the military services, Army, Space Force potentially? So if you really were to stretch the imagination, where do you see those pieces evolving to?
So I think I can answer that very succinctly and say, wherever human activity has gone, and in terms of expanding its frontiers in our history, security needs follow, always. And so as our activity economically, exploration-wise expands, so will security needs. And I do think that the U.S. Space Force and U.S. Space Command are at the forefront of those security needs for the foreseeable future.
Outstanding. Thank you for that. I think the final question I'll ask, again, is sort of stretching a little bit. You know, there are some folks that are talking about maybe the need for DoD sensors on the lunar surface, maybe the need for resources connected to sort of what NASA may be doing on the surface. Do you see that projecting forward, maybe for space domain awareness capabilities and things of that nature?
I think to say we will, when we determine what a mission need is, and then we find out what the best way to meet that solution, technological solution is, that's what it'll be. It may be that we never need to put sensors on the moon itself, simply in lunar orbit or in halo orbits around Lagrange points or elsewhere in the Earth-Moon system. So I wouldn't want to rush to a solution that says this is what we're going to need. I think it will be identifying that we will have space domain awareness challenges. And eventually, by the way, those will expand beyond the Cislunar sphere. We just need to kind of look at Cislunar and get that right in the next few years. And then the solutions will follow.
Outstanding. Thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the Q&A session with General Shaw. General Shaw, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us and giving us some of your time today for this inaugural conference. Congratulations on your Senate confirmation yesterday, and I know we all look forward to working closely with the Space Force as we move forward in thinking about the cislunar security needs. Vinny?
Okay, well, thank you, and again, thanks to Johns Hopkins for hosting this. Again, the first of many, many, many more to come, and I hope maybe we can all do this in person next year. I'd love to be there. It sounds like it's going to a terrific agenda with some really awesome topics. So thanks so much for this opportunity to do a keynote today.
Thank you, sir. Vinny, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, General Shaw. Thank you, Patrick Benning. At this point, folks, we are moving into a lunch break, so please plan to reconvene at 1 p.m. for the policy, strategy, and doctrine panel discussion with some great panelists. Dr. Werwell will return to moderate that discussion. So I will see you all at 1 o'clock. Thank you, and see you then.